All right, everybody, how we doing? It's Nate. This is my boy Zach.
How's it going, guys?
Startup Nation, episode 3. So Zach King here is going to tell us some pretty crazy stories today. He has had a ton of success when it comes to his entrepreneurial journey. Also, how that relates to maybe how it works in the corporate world and the red tape associated with that relative to his entrepreneurial experience. And also kind of why he decided to be an entrepreneur relative to maybe his background in sports. And so again, episode 3, check it out. This is my boy Zach, everybody. I brought him in today because I thought his story was going to be really inspiring for some. And I wanted to just tell us about your story a little bit, about how you started, where you come from, why, how you started your entrepreneurial journey.
For sure. Well, I grew up in a restaurant family. My grandfather was in the restaurant business since the 40s. He owned nightclubs, bars, all different types of businesses. So I always, as a kid, grew up, around people in different businesses, especially restaurants. And then in my adolescence, my uncle actually took on his restaurant and, expanded it and opened up a barbecue restaurant. So I can remember, after high school basketball games, going to bus tables. Didn't get paid, but it was free labor for them. But it was hard work for me. But it was a great experience just to be around that as a young age, at a young age. And what it showed me in a lot of ways was that, ownership is key. Or, a lot of times people are always trying to figure out, what do they want to do when they grow up or something like that. But when you have something that you're passionate about and something that is not only for you but for your family, it's just eye-opening, especially at a young age when you have all that community and family trying to reach the same goal.
That exposure probably helped you to understand a little bit more.
Totally. So that was kind of like my first look at owning a business or being around business people. And then I went to college, University of Florida, played football there from 02 to 05. Didn't win a championship, so and obviously didn't go to the NFL. But after college, my whole thing was, how can I get back into something where I'm working for myself? I didn't really have a job in mind or anything like that. Once football kind of didn't work out for me, I was like, hey, what am I going to do?
Was your intention to go to the NFL? And
I
all
mean,
that,
anybody plays at Florida, SEC. I mean, that's their intent. Nobody at those schools is sorry or. But it's just sometimes just the luck of the draw. And when we were there, we were 8-5 every year. I think we lost Outback Bowl 2 years or 3 years in a row. So, and knowing my luck, after I left, they win 2 back-to-back championships. So,
damn
right. So that really didn't really work out. But what it did show me, how to reinvent myself. And I think that's the first step, in any type of business or even if you're having a job, learning that, hey, maybe when things don't go your way, how do you deal with that adversity? So when football didn't work out, I had my best friend who I ended up going in business with to open up my chicken franchise, which was called Chicken Now. His dad already had food court restaurant experience and was more like an Asian concepts. Teppanyaki, Chinese, Cajun type restaurants in the food court. And anybody in the food court business will tell you, there's only so many boxes in the food court. Yep. You'd rather compete with yourself than have Panda Express or McDonald's going there. If you can open up another one, you'd rather have that. Yep. So he didn't have a chicken concept, and my family obviously had the fried chicken and barbecue restaurant business experience. So he confronted me and said, hey, Zach, football's not working out. What do we want to do? What are you doing after college? And I had no idea. And so he's like, well, this is an idea that, we can kind of come up with. So we started basically, working my last semester of college towards this goal of opening up a chicken restaurant. And sure enough, I graduated in May. August of that year, we were already open with our first store in Orlando.
So you didn't take too long, huh?
No, not at all. My mom was happy about that too. After I graduated, she's like, you got to have a job on Monday. So I ain't paying you. I think she turned my room into an office as soon as I was walking down the graduation aisle.
So why don't you talk a little bit about that? How that, you don't go into extreme detail, but from May to August, the business plan and how you started. Was it the partner that really knew that process?
Well, the partner knew the process of actually finding the locations, the construction. My expertise was obviously the recipes, and these were family recipes, things that I'd known all my life. So that was what I brought to the table. But from May to August, basically from that whole grand opening stage, we had to go through hiring, we had to go through training manuals. So you're starting completely from scratch, and obviously he had the real estate background and the food court knowledge, but he didn't have the knowledge of this concept. Okay. So here I am, 23 years old, fresh out of college, You know, I'm hiring people that are, you know, twice my age. You know, I know what to do, but I don't really know how to implement it all the way in a business. So I'm learning on the go. You know, people are looking at me for advice. Truthfully honest, I didn't even know what the hell I was doing, but I had to act like I knew what I was doing.
Make it work.
Totally. And then, you know, the hardest part of anybody will tell you in any business is, you know, you can have a great business plan, but it's the people. The people, that's the toughest part of management or any type of, you know, anytime you're trying to plan a successful plan, like, hey, go to market. If you don't have the right people involved, that's the toughest part. And unfortunately, in the business I was in with the food court restaurant, you know, you have a lot of high turnover. People work in the malls, so they can quit your restaurant and go right to Nike or another store and work. So they don't really buy into the concept of, hey, this is a long-term career. And it's tough to do that, you know, unless you've got somebody who you've kind of brought through the ranks and brought them up. So
talk about a little bit about the people. I know that's a big thing we talked about. It's just, you know, in my industry with our services, we actually service restaurants, as you know, for the cleaning, and our retention or our attrition is really high the first month, like 50%. Luckily, they're generally not even touching a restaurant by that point because they're in training. But after the first month, then we know that they're going to stay more likely because of the fact that it's night work and people can't cut night work. In the restaurant world, it's a little bit different because you typically hire a younger generation, right? And so their mentality when it comes to loyalty and all that's probably a little bit different, right?
Exactly. So in my background, there's two different types of people that are the challenges. Obviously, you're in the restaurant business, so you have your customers. Yep. So when you're dealing with customers, you know, if you're a restaurant they've never heard of, you know, you have to deal with that whole education piece of educating them on maybe your story, why you're open, you know, maybe your branding, or even some instances, depending on where you're located, educating on them on how to eat. Yeah. Like, you know, I'm from the South, you know, nobody cares about calories. Everybody's, you know, Texas toast, extra sugar, extra butter. But, you know, I had stores in, you know, New York, Albany, New York, where maybe they didn't know what Texas toast was. Yeah. Or when I opened up in Seattle, they didn't know.
Or they're more conscious.
Right. Or, you know, you sweet tea in the South is basically just diabetes in a cup. Yep. And, you know, you go somewhere else, and like in, you know, Westwood, Hollywood, LA, they're like, man, this is the way. Right. So, you know, when you're dealing with people, you have to realize that education is the hardest piece. So many times I hear stories from people that want to get in business and they're scared of their competition. And I tell them all the time, it's not your competition, because if there's competition, people are already educated. Yep. You know, you see a Chick-fil-A Raising Cane's, you see McDonald's, Burger King, like people already in that area want a burger or want chicken. They know what they want.
That's almost an advantage, isn't it?
Totally. So I'd rather compete with that than competing with you on how to, as a customer, how to eat Texas toast or drink sweet tea. Yeah. So that was the first challenge, being a new concept. Especially in the food court where people can just make an instant decision and walk right next door. There's not like they have to get in their car and drive somewhere else.
And name recognition too, and all that's what you're trying to challenge yourself.
Exactly. And then from an employee standpoint, you know, unfortunately, unless somebody has, you know, is in a management level or has grown with you throughout the ranks, you know, you're dealing with employees that are making minimum wage at best or a little bit over. You know, financially, you can't really incentivize them until they've, you know, done their tenure, and if the average turnover is less than 6 months. So, you know, if you're not going to invest in me, how can I really invest in you and reward you if you're not there for the long term? Now, what made it even tougher in my particular instance was my recipes were all homemade. So, like, if I brought everything in here, I could cook my, you know, all my stuff right in front of you, which sounds great. You know, and when the food was executed properly, you know, it was some of the best chicken and other side dishes that you've ever had. The problem with that is if you've got a high turnover with employees, you know, some of those recipes might change. You know, one person wants extra sugar, one person wants extra butter. So the management of that became difficult.
That's not consistent, right?
Exactly. So that's kind of give you kind of an idea a little bit of some of the people issues that I had. But I mean, that's I'm pretty sure common in any new business.
I think it's good for people that are listening though. It's those little minute things. There's probably 500 examples of that in any industry where you're like in Green Guard, it's like, this is something simple, but we drop off this chemical that we did a video for this morning, we tell them to drop it off and take a picture 10 feet away from where they dropped it off so then the client knows where it is. Right. But every single time, all of a sudden now a new guy takes a picture 3 feet away. Yeah. Sounds silly, but then the client's like, well, I don't know where that picture's from, right? Exactly. So it's the same type of concept as where you're like, well, why is this sauce sweeter than the one from the other, you know?
Exactly, right, because that person wants it sweeter. And then the thing too, when you're young, and you can relate to this, you know, I was 23 when I first started. So, you know, people immediately they realize like, hey, this is your baby. You know, this is your business, and it's like a child. You cultivate it from the ground stage up, and that's great, and that's an inspiring story. But what happens when people are not as equally invested as you? They know, well, hey, if I slack up, you know, this is Nate's baby or this is Zach's baby. Yeah. You know, they'll take over, and dealing with the decision where, hey, I got a job to get done. It has to be done right, but I still want to at least be able to grow it where I can manage people from afar without having to be so hands-on, it's tough because people take advantage of that. And they know like, hey, you got $250,000 invested in this. If I don't show up to work, I know you're going to cover me. I mean, you're stuck, and that's the toughest part when you want to be on the ground stages, you want to be on the front lines, you want to show your employees that you're invested and you care about their well-being and the business. But sometimes when you're too much on the front lines, it's tough.
Talk a little bit about, because we're on the discussion of employees, how you create that culture, and even from a one-store level, and then in the next episode in 4, which you guys will hear in a little bit, we'll talk about the growth and how you then make that economies of scale. But I can tell you with my business right now, and I try to say this in the nicest way possible, but most people don't raise their hand and say, I want to be a hood cleaner when they're 18 years old. No. They just don't. That wasn't their lifelong ambition, right? Mm-hmm. So the reality is, and I'm not trying to be down on what my company does, because the reality is it's a necessary type of service. It keeps people safe. It's actually quite important. Mm-hmm. So I can't sit there and try to lie or fib about making that specific service fun.
You can't create that passion.
But what I can create is a good culture. Totally. So like we have music on Fridays. We're having a barbecue go outside right now where we cook burgers and all that stuff every Friday for our guys. We have pool table and Xbox competitions. We have company events. We have all these things to say. It's not that I thoroughly enjoy cleaning a greasy fan, but I like working for Green Guard. Totally. And so those are two different things. And the reality is as long as they understand they're part of a bigger picture, meaning that they're keeping people safe and that they enjoy working for the company, then we win, right? Totally. And so do they. And I think the same argument could go for a restaurant or fast food or whatever you want, fast casual, whatever you want to call it, because making wing sauces every day probably gets a little bit monotonous, but you try to create the culture in which they like to work for Chicken Down Zack, not that specific function of like cooking wings or frying wings, right? 100%. So what did you do in your world?
Well, I mean, when I first started, I was just hiring people, and I was completely naive. I gave a lot of people chances and just kind of took people as they would come, and I was glad to have the help. So I think initially I didn't invest in culture. Initially it was I'm just investing in manpower because I need people there to physically help me open. When you're dealing with deadlines, hey, the mall's open on Friday, you got to be open on Friday. So initially I didn't hire for culture. I think later on as I grew, because I was in business for a little bit over 6 years, you start to ask better questions on the interview. To be honest with you, you actually steal. You steal employees based on that fit. Like if you got somebody who is relatable, or somebody who you have something in common with, who maybe works in another place. I started going to restaurants and picking people that I just naturally either had a vibe with or gravitated towards, or I felt they were a hard worker. So I think that the culture piece is you got to hire for fit. But before you can do that, you got to kind of know what are you trying to accomplish as a business, and who do you want representing you?
So what's your values, what your culture is?
Values, cultures, goals, even work ethic, things like that. A lot of things, you can have a great training manual, but some of these things are just not trainable. You just have to have somebody who buys into it. Now, you talked about like some of the activities and stuff you guys do, and that's great. But I think too, we can touch on for people listening, like there is a difference between activities and culture. Absolutely. Right. So like, those activities are great, and I think they definitely create a great work environment. And I did the same thing, employee of the month, employee bonuses, paid leave. I mean,
all that stuff. Yeah.
All that stuff, trips, here goes, tickets to the, football game, all those things that kind of create a great work environment. But at the same time, you could have somebody partaking in all that, and if they're not the right fit, and if they don't buy in, they're just a person doing it.
They're not fitting the values. They're just doing it, yeah.
And that's key because both of our businesses, you're dealing with people. You can't be everywhere, and I couldn't have been at 55 chicken restaurants, right? So it's like you got to pick somebody who represents you, and who is a mini version of you, and really takes that job just as seriously as you do, because they're the one representing you. At the end of the day, I can always call you and be like, hey Nathan, this is what happened. But if so-and-so showed up at my restaurant and it was a jerk, you're a great guy, but that's not being represented in your business. Right.
It has to flow through your entire staff, right?
Totally. And last but not least, one thing that I did too is a little easier for me with the restaurant. I did things like secret shopper. People just to make sure that culture or those rules or those things were being implemented. I mean, people listen. I mean, everybody goes to In-N-Out. Yeah. I mean, go to Chick-fil-A. Places like that have a great culture, and they've made, even young kids, they made kids buy into it. I mean, I actually go to Chick-fil-A all the time. And I'm like, it's a joke. Like, when is she not going to say my pleasure?
Have you ever seen Have you ever seen somebody at Chick-fil-A not be happy?
No. The same thing in In-N-Out. And if you do it, like they have a great training program. They invest in their employees. They pay them well. There's incentive programs. I mean, so that's the atmosphere you want to create.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you bring up a good point. We've been talking a lot about that internally with one of my businesses right now, our largest service business. in regards to it's unique. There's not that many companies that we necessarily compete against, but there's a lot of companies. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of like just John and his brother out of their house. But if we were to have somebody that would necessarily apply as a hood cleaner to us, 95% of the time they've never worked out. No. And it's because they don't have the values we're looking for, the work ethic. So for us, to your point, we only hire on what would be potentially a good culture fit. And even if there's, like, I have a specific employee in this company, I won't name the name just out of respect, but this employee is a really, really good culture fit, but his learning curve is significantly longer than the next person, just because of his life experience, where he came from, things like that. But for us, I'd much rather put 2 years into that person's learning and know that he's going to work his ass off, be positive, be accountable, all the things that are on this devotion, 100%. Resilience. Because if he has all that, I can't teach resilience. I can't teach devotion. That doesn't. I mean, and if I could, it would take forever.
Exactly.
And that sounds pretty selfish, but the reality is we're not in the business to build the psychology behind somebody.
Not at all.
So this has to be something innate in them, and if it is, then they're impressionable. Then that's worth way more.
Totally, and that's going to rub off.
Oh, yeah.
He's going to work with somebody, and maybe they're not as passionate as him, but it's totally contagious.
Yeah, and so finding those people, to your point, is what we do now. We don't even look for people that have the previous experience. Yeah. We have a good training program now that do that. We want somebody that fits the culture here, and if you do that, it becomes infectious.
Totally.
And I think that you put that very well.
No, definitely, and that's what you need, because that's what that rubs off on even your customers. Because at the end of the day, you talk about the other side of those people. That's the people that are keeping you in business, and they want people showing up that are happy. And hey, if I'm paying you, you're doing a great service. At the end of the day, you have to have something that separates you. That's not tangible. Yep. And that's that piece.
It's funny you bring that up, because this is more on the motivation piece, but a lot of people talk about like your circle, right, and who you involve yourself around, and you're like the 5 people you're closest to. That same philosophy applies from just an employment standpoint too, right? If you're around, and this sounds like kind of a duh statement, but if you're around a bunch of positive people and people that want to be there and people that enjoy, naturally you're going to want to be like that. If you're going to be that one person that's going to be a pessimist and just in a piss poor mood all the time in the corner, it's going to be very clear, and you're going to be out pretty quickly.
Totally.
Right. And so building that culture, I think, is, I don't know if people know this, but the average cost, and I don't know the exact number, for when you lose somebody, especially in our world, was like 2 times the salary of that person for the year, something crazy like that, right? And so like we did a study a couple years ago where we lost quite a bit of people for Green Guard, and we said over like an 8-month period we spent over $100,000 between training and swag that we gave away, and just the time that we invested, and the HR time and all that, just because of retention. And we're like, shit, you could, if you could cut that retention in half, you could literally pay people more.
Totally. And
now your culture is being, because they're paying them more, and you can do all these other things, versus just sitting there and saying, well, it's $100,000, that's what happens.
Yeah, and think about it from a customer. I always try to put myself in a customer standpoint as a business person. Yep. If you go to a restaurant, they got high turnover. Everybody can't be the problem. It's got to be a system problem. It can't be every employee's fault.
The leadership process.
There's something missing there. And when you're in businesses, like, you don't want to deal with a new person every week. I might be calling Green Card just because of you. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I would do. Yeah. So that's what your customer's thinking, and you want to make it as painless as possible for them.
We get that a lot with our clients, where I want Miguel because he's like, we have a casino we service out in Agua Caliente in Palm Springs, and they're like, we love this guy, bring him. They had a hood cleaning company that had like 10 different cleaners they used for 10 years, but ever since now they're like, holy crap, the grass is greener in this situation, right? And they said, we want Miguel, but he's been with us for 4 or 5 years now, and he's built that relationship with them where he's like, we know he's going to keep us safe, and he does the right thing. And I think that's extremely valuable, because now they're bleeding that culture into the clients too, which is extremely valuable. You can't even put a number on that,
Not
right?
At all.
And so
Right.
That's good. So today we just talked about employees. Zach had a ton of experience. On our next episode, we're going to talk about how he manages this employees with 50+ chicken restaurants, because that's going to be a fun story. We're also going to talk about the need for the certain work ethic. He has some pretty crazy stories about that. And we're going to talk about the growth of a business and how you basically capitalize on infrastructure and economies of scale when you're doing it, but also the difficulties with that. So this was episode 3 with Zach King. Good looking out. Say what's up, Zach.
See you guys.
Thanks, guys.